Well, aloha everyone, and welcome back to Nutrition here at Chaminade University. Today we'll be delving into Lecture 2, which is going to discuss tools for healthy eating. The learning outcomes of this lecture include describing the principles of healthy eating and distinguishing between the dietary reference intake terms EAR, AI, RDA, UL, and AMDR. By the end of this lecture, you should know what all of those acronyms mean. We'll describe the recommendations included in the dietary guidelines for Americans and explain the MyPlate food guidance system, including all the food groups and typical food groups represented. We'll describe how the exchange system can be used as a guide to plan a balanced diet and identify the required components of a food label and the nutritional facts panel. We'll compare the terms portion and serving size and summarize the health benefits of portion control. So, what are the key principles of healthy eating? Now, healthy eating means that an individual's diet incorporates balance, variety, and moderation. Additional principles that we might discuss through this lecture include nutrient density and energy density. So, in order to have a healthy diet, you must have a balanced diet. And a balanced diet means that you're having a healthy proportion of nutrients to maintain your health and to prevent disease. Now, if your diet becomes unbalanced, that can lead to undernutrition, or not getting enough nutrients, or overnutrition, meaning that you're getting too many nutrients. And if prolonged undernutritive or overnutritive states occur, you can end up with malnutrition. So malnutrition would be the long-term consequences of consuming too many or too little nutrients. So the idea here is that you want food variety. Variety is the dietary principle that means you're including a mixture of different food groups and foods from each food group. So if you're eating a balanced diet, you're eating a variety of foods, and that's going to improve your diet quality, as not a single food or food group is going to be able to contain every single nutrient that the individual needs to maintain health. So individuals should be sure that you choose a variety of foods within those food groups and among those food groups in order to achieve a healthy diet. And the key thing here is moderation. So moderation is a principle of consuming reasonable but not excessive amounts of food and nutrients. In fact, all foods can be included in a healthy diet, even those high fat, high salt, high sugar, etc., as long as they are consumed in moderation. In fact, you want to consume foods that are high in added sugars and higher fats in even smaller amounts. And you want to limit portions and the number of servings of nutrient-dense and energy-dense foods, such as nuts and avocados. So what does nutrient-dense mean? Nutrient density is a measurement of the nutrients inside the food as a ratio of the kilocalorie content. So a nutrient-dense food would be high in nutrients and low in kilocalories and provide more nutrients per kilocalorie than, say, a food that is not nutrient-dense. And it would be lower in fat and in added sugar. Now, some nutrient-dense foods are high in kilocalories as well, things like avocado and peanut butter. So be mindful of the kilocalories in these types of foods and consume those in moderation. This is just an image depicting that you could eat the same food, in this case a potato, but have it baked in two different ways, one baked and one fried into potato chips. And that in the baked potato, you're going to retain a lot more of the nutrients, more potassium, more vitamin C, more folate. So it's a healthier way to enjoy the calories found in a potato. Again, energy density is a measurement of kilocalories compared with the weight of the food. So how many calories do you get out of how many grams? And most high-fat foods are energy dense, and that's because, again, fat gives you more calorie per gram than, say, carbohydrates or proteins. And low energy dense foods can improve weight loss. That means that you can eat more grams of the food but have less calories going in. So if you eat low energy dense foods, that means you're eating larger portions for the same number of kilocalories, which might help improve what's called satiety, or the feeling of fullness, and help decrease the feeling of being hungry. All right, so this is talking about bargain shopping on an energy budget. So what does that mean? So if you're looking for energy dense foods, you're going to be looking at whether or not they have the right amount of energy per kilogram. So something like soups, fruits, and vegetables are really good energy bargains because you can eat a lot of these low energy dense foods as you want and low energy budget. So the one thing that you want to pay attention to is that soups sometimes have high sodium and can be cream based, and the creams can increase your energy density. But the thing is, these are low energy foods. That means that you're getting 0 to 0.6 kcals per gram of food. If you have a good energy bargain, that means that you're getting a little bit higher energy dense. This includes things like starchy fruits and vegetables, lean meats, beans. Here you're getting 0.6 to 1.5 kcals per gram. Still a good energy bargain. It's healthy, healthier portions of these foods on a low energy budget. If you start getting up into the higher energy dense things like cheeses, salad dressings, you're going to end up with more calories per gram. And in the higher end, you get things like chocolates, deep fried foods, nuts, chips and candy, and these get to 4 to 9 kcals per gram. And these get to become very expensive food choices. These foods will blow all of your energy budget. So even though you're consuming X amount of kcals, you will have a high energy, X amount of grams, you're going to have much more kcals consumed if you eat grams of these foods than if you eat grams of those foods. So not all grams of food are created equal. So the things that have high kcals per gram are considered expensive energy choices on an energy budget. All right, so what is a DRI? A DRI is a dietary reference intake. And a dietary reference intake serves to provide recommendations on a daily nutrient needs for the individuals. We have dietary guidelines for Americans, which is a broad dietary and lifestyle advice, and also myplate.gov, which you can find online. This is a web-based tool that helps you implement your recommendations of your daily reference intakes and dietary guidelines. There's also an exchange system whereby you can exchange one food for another food used for meal planning so that you can end up making sure that you get the right macronutrient content. Additionally, another resource is the Nutrition Fact Panel, and this is going to help provide your daily values for your foods to help consumers choose more healthy foods. So this is what that looks like if you were to go to myplate.gov. There's other things that you can use. There's dietary guidelines for Americans, the 2010 version. I'm sure there's one that's a little bit more recent that you can find as well. And this is something that you will probably see or have probably seen 1,000 times in your life, if not a million. This is a nutrition facts label. And on that nutrition facts label, it tells you the total content in that food per serving of that food, total amount of fat, be it saturated or trans fat, total amount of cholesterol, total amount of sodium, total amount of fiber, etc. All listed right there. Not only does it say sugars, but it also says added sugars. So it's been changed a little bit since that was posted. So again, what is a DRI? A DRI is a reference intake for each nutrient, and it tells you how much of that nutrient you need to consume in order to prevent disease and maintain good health and avoid excess. Now, periodically, these DRIs are updated by scientists and health experts, and they have specific committees that are organized by the Institutes of Medicine to make sure that these are still the same dietary guidelines that you would need to be taking that they had published from the past study. So they want to make sure that things haven't changed and the parameters are still correct. Now, DRIs are going to be different for different stages of your life and for different life conditions. For example, a pregnant woman should be eating about 700 calories more. Full-term pregnancy, early stages, she should be eating 300 to 400 calories more than a non-pregnant woman. Your age also plays a role in the amount of nutrients you're supposed to be taking in, and also your gender, right? Males should be taking in more calories than females. So the DRI has 5 reference values. These are going to be the estimated average requirement. That's the EAR. That's the average requirement to maintain a healthy diet. The recommended dietary allowance, that's the RDA, and the adequate intake level. So although the estimated average requirement might be a little bit higher, your adequate intake level might be a little bit lower. Additionally, we have something called the tolerable upper intake level, and that's going to be the level before you reach toxicity. So there's going to be a broad range, the average of which would be the EAR, the low amount would be the adequate intake, and the upper amount would be the tolerable upper intake level. We also have what's called the Acceptable Macronutrient Distribution Range, or the AMDR, which is used to talk about the distribution of the macronutrients within your body and the proportions that you should be consuming them. So the quality of meal is assessed by either the RDA or the AI, but not both. The AMDR, again, that macronutrient distribution range, and the upper limit. These are all used to assess the quality of the diet. Now, the estimated average requirement, or the EAR, is defined as the amount of the nutrient that's needed to meet the needs of 50% of healthy Americans, by age and gender. And that's based on measurement that determines whether an individual is or is not at risk for deficiency of this vitamin or nutrient. And EARs are not going to be established if there's insufficient research to develop the appropriate measurement. So some nutrients might not have the EAR because we just don't have enough research in place. So once the EARs are set, these are used to calculate the RDAs. RDAs are the recommended dietary allowance, which is the recommendation for each of the nutrients that meets the needs of almost all of the individuals in a specific gender and age group. It's typically going to be higher than the EAR. And as we mentioned previously, it's not going to be available for all nutrients because not all nutrients have been studied appropriately to be able to come up with these numbers. So some nutrients that don't have the RDA, they can use what's called the adequate intake guidelines. So AI can provide an alternative guideline for nutrients that lack the RDA. So what does AI stand for? Again, adequate intake. This number is an estimate based on the Food and Nutrition Board members according to the most current research. And it basically says what is the adequate amount that you would need to stay healthy. And it's the closest scientific estimate of the amount of nutrient that a group of individuals should consume to maintain good health. And it's only set without having established EARs. So we don't really know what the EAR is, but we can still figure out what the adequate intake is. And it's the only estimated for certain nutrients, particularly for adequacy in infant diets. Now, this tolerable upper intake level, or UL, that's going to be a toxic level, the highest amount of a nutrient that is unlikely to cause harm if consumed daily. Anything above that can increase the risk of nutrient toxicity. Now, not all nutrients have ULs, in that some of them are going to be water soluble and are just going to have the excess secreted out into the urine. So an AMDR stands for Acceptable Macronutrient Distribution Range. And this helps ensure that the intake of nutrients is going to be adequate and proportionate to meet the individual's physiological needs. For carbohydrates, that's 45 to 65% of your kcals. For fats, that's 20 to 35% of your kcals. And for protein, that's 10 to 35% of your kcals. So you may remember in the previous lecture, we talked about how to figure out what percentage of your diet was comprised of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins by looking at the grams of each of the different food groups that you consume and then multiplying that out by the amount of kcals each of those foods are comprised of. And then you can divide the total amount of carbohydrate calories by the total amount of daily calories, etc. And if you do that, carbohydrates should be somewhere between 45 and 65, fats between 20 and 35, and proteins 10 to 35. And that's going to be your normal acceptable macronutrient distribution range. Anything out of that can lead to malnutrition. All right, your estimated energy requirements, or EER, as opposed to EAR, your estimated energy requirement is defined as the amount of the daily energy that is needed to maintain a healthy body weight and meet the energy needs of an individual based on multiple different factors, including age, gender, height, weight, and the activity of the individual. So we don't have any daily recommended intake set for the energy intake. And individuals who consume more energy than needed will gain weight. So it comes down to energy in, energy out, right? And if you have more energy going out than coming in, you will lose weight. If you have more energy coming in than going out, you will gain weight. All right, so this is just kind of an overview of all the different dietary reference intakes, or DRIs. We have here the EAR, estimated average requirement, the RDA, recommended dietary allowance, and the AI, the adequate intake. You would either have the AI or the RDA used to determine how much you would want to consume in a day. The UL is the tolerable upper intake level, which is the amount that you can have before you have toxicity. As you can see, anything above that level will increase the risk of toxicity. And this graph shows you how it breaks down. So here is the EAR, when half of the individuals have met their nutrient needs. Here's the RDA, the recommended dietary allowance. AI is not depicted here. And here's the upper limit. Anything above that increases your risk of toxicity. The AMDR shows you the breakdown of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins in the percentages of your diet. And that's called the acceptable macronutrient distribution range. And the EER is the estimated energy requirement, which is the average daily energy intake predicted to meet the needs of healthy adults. So this slide is basically summarizing what the previous slide said in graph form. All right, so every individual needs to have a different amount of calories coming in, and that depends on several things. Depends on whether they're male or female. So if you're male, you're going to be looking here. Females, you're going to be looking here. And then it depends on your age. So the first thing you do is figure out your sex and then figure out your bracket. I'm a female and I'm about to turn 40 this year. So I'm going to fall in this 36 to 40 range. As a sedentary lifestyle, I would be 1800. However, I have two toddlers and I work full time. So I would consider myself moderately active even though I don't go to the gym very often. So I probably need about 2000 calories per day. So again, you're going to find your sex, you're going to find your age, and then you're going to find your activity level. And that's going to give you the daily amount of kilocalories that you ought to be consuming. Okay, so in order to calculate the AMDR, remember the AMDR is the amount of dietary intake that you'll need from each of these different groups. So if you were to calculate out that you need 2150, right? I needed 2000, but say we needed 2150. Then you would look at the amount of carbohydrates that you would need would be somewhere between 45 and 65%. All right, so the lower level will be 45%, the upper level will be 65%. That would mean if you multiply that out, 45% of 2150 is 968 kcals on the lower limit and 1398 kcals on the upper limit. So an individual who needs to have 2150 kcals per day should be getting 968 to 1398 of that from carbohydrates. Right? For fat, it's supposed to be 20 to 35%. So to figure out that range, 20% of 2150 is 430. 35% of 2150 is 753. So 430 to 753 kcals should be from fat, no more and no less. All right, so what are you using the DRIs for? Do you use them to plan your diet? Which ones do you use when? So the estimated average requirement is not what you're going to be using. As I go backwards just a little bit, you can see the estimated daily requirement, estimated average requirement is actually going to be much lower than the RDA. So while you might not hit the RDA every day, your goal should be to aim to hit the RDA every day, the recommended dietary allowance. So really you should be aiming to hit the RDA for that nutrient, not the EAR. The adequate intake level is what you would use if the RDA wasn't available. So you would aim for the AI level if you didn't have an RDA information available. The tolerable upper intake level is the information about the volume that you do not want to exceed. So don't exceed the amount of that individual nutrient on a daily basis or you could end up having toxicity. And the AMDR is the macronutrient distribution range. So try to follow those guidelines regarding the percentage of carbohydrates, proteins, and fats that are found in your diet. So what is the purpose of the dietary guidelines for Americans, right? The objective is to improve the quality of nutritional intake and reduce the incidence of overnutrition and hence the associated health problems, which are all going to be from malnutrition, which I know you think of malnutrition as being undernourished, but malnutrition can also refer to overnourishment. And all of the health problems associated with that form of malnutrition for Americans. Additionally, it's to educate. Remember we spoke previously about education and knowledge being the top priority. Once you know, then you can at least make informed decisions. If you didn't know, you'd be making completely uninformed decisions. And those decisions can be, those guidelines can be used to help guide you concerning your healthy diet and choices for your lifestyle. Additionally, they help, the dietary guidelines help to shape the federally funded nutritional programs in terms of research and dietary labeling. All right, so it's updated every 5 years by the USDA and the Department of Health and Human Services, and the objective is to help individuals that are 2 years old and over to be able to improve their quality of diet and to promote their overall general health, and thereby lower the risk of chronic diseases and unhealthy conditions. So if you were to take a look at the daily guidelines for Americans, it's a pretty long pamphlet, but in general it has some pretty important points. So if you were to take a look at it at a glance, one of the main objectives is to balance your kilocalories to help manage your weight. So you can prevent or reduce your overweight or obesity by improved eating and physical activities. Control your total calorie intake to manage your body weight. Right? And that means that if you're already overweight or obese, you may need to actually be consuming fewer calories than your daily recommended guidelines so that you can shed those calories from your body. And you'll do that also by increasing your physical activity and reducing the time spent in sedentary behaviors like sitting in front of computers, listening to nutrition lectures. Also maintaining appropriate kilocalorie balance during each stage of life like childhood, adolescence, adulthood, pregnancy, breastfeeding, and older age. Additionally, and it's going to tell you to reduce these foods and food components. Reduce your sodium intake to less than 2,300 milligrams. Consume less than 10% of kilocalories from saturated fatty acids. Consume less than 300 milligrams of daily dietary cholesterol. Avoid trans fat consumption. Reduce the intake of kilocalories from solid fats and sugars. Limit the consumption of foods that contain refined grains, especially grain foods that contain solid fats, added sugars, and sodium. And if alcohol is consumed, it should be consumed in moderation. 1 drink per day for women and 2 drinks per day for men, and obviously only by adults of legal drinking age. But remember that alcohol is a non-nutritive calorie consumer. So it will add calories to your diet, but not add any nutrition to your diet at all. And it adds calories at a rate of 7 kilocalories per gram. Increase fruits and vegetables, eat a variety of vegetables, increase milk products, specifically fat-free and low-fat milk products, also things like milk, yogurt, cheese, and soy beverages. Choose protein foods that include seafood, meats, eggs, poultry, beans. Increase the amount of variety of seafood consumed. Replace protein foods that are higher in solid fats with choices that are lower in solid fats. Use oils instead of fats wherever possible. Oh, sorry. And then also choose foods that produce or provide potassium, fiber, calcium, and vitamin D, which are nutrients that are of concern in American diets. That means that we typically, as Americans, do not consume enough fiber, calcium, and vitamin D. And foods that contain these include vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and milk products. And the objective here is to build a healthy eating pattern where you start having an eating pattern that meets your nutrient needs at an appropriate kcal level, accounting for all foods and beverages consumed, and assess how they fit within a total healthy eating pattern, and follow food safety recommendations when preparing and eating these foods to reduce the risk of foodborne illnesses. All right, so that brings us back to MyPlate. So MyPlate Food Guidance System is a visual depiction of the recommendations that are made in the dietary guidelines. It's a web-based tool that you can log on to and you can put your food into it, and it gives you information, tips, and tools that will help you build a healthier diet. So if you get the chance, you should head right on over to myplate.gov and take a look at all the different food groups, and then you can also track your diet and see how it fits in terms of meeting the recommended parameters. It has an interactive food guidance system that allows you to have a personalized food plan so you can monitor the amount of food that you're consuming and monitor the amount of which nutrients you're consuming as well. And again, that's myplate.gov. It's going to allow you to have 5 major food groups: fruits, grains, vegetables, protein, and dairy. As you can see, you should be consuming large amounts of grains and vegetables and fruits and protein, right? Smaller amounts of dairy. And it shows you the 5 food groups in a relative proportion using the place setting. So if you were to picture that you had 1 plate of food, that should be the relative proportion of those particular food groups in 1 meal. This is going to help promote proportionality, so making sure that you are eating food in moderation, that you have variety in your food, and it allows you personalization of your own diet. Again, it's split into 5 sections: grains, fruits, vegetables, protein, and dairy. And while oils are an important part of the diet, they're not considered a food group. Again, proportionality is one of the most important things in changing your diet for a healthier, in a healthier manner. Proportionality is the relationship of one group to another. So vegetables and fruits should be consumed in higher proportion than dairy and proteins. Fruits and vegetables should make up half of the plate. The smaller portion should come from grains and lean protein sources, and all of your dairy choices should, whenever possible, be low fat or fat-free. The objective here would be to balance your kilocalories, right? Enjoy your food, but eat less and avoid oversized portions. And increasing the volume of your fruits and vegetables. At least half of your plate should be fruits and vegetables. And most of your grains should be whole grains wherever possible. And switching to fat-free milk or low-fat milk will help eliminate the fat in your diet while still maintaining all of the good things that come from the milk, like the proteins and the sugars. All right, so you also want to reduce the following foods, right? You want to reduce sodium and sugar. So you want to compare the sodium in your foods and try to, whenever possible, have low sodium options for soup, bread, and frozen meals. Oftentimes frozen meals are very high in sodium. Choose the ones with the lower numbers if possible. Drink water instead of your sugary drinks whenever possible to help reduce the amount of liquid sugars that are consumed in your diet. Now, the overview that you need here, the takeaway message, is you want to balance your kilocalories in and kilocalories out. You want to choose nutrient-dense foods from each food group. And if you choose nutrient-dense foods, that's going to lower your fat and sugar in the diet. You also want to have a physically active lifestyle because being physically active helps with weight management and with reducing the risk for disease. These are some nutrient-dense food choices, right? So you want to eat less of the ones at the top and more of the ones at the bottom, right? More of the ones that are nutrient dense. So things like fresh frozen vegetables as opposed to French fries and potato chips. Dried fruit, whole fruit, or 100% fruit juice, no added sugars, as opposed to the fruit canned in syrup, which is very often, fruit drinks, or sweetened dried fruit. Here's some options for grains that are going to be more nutrient dense. Things like cereals, bread, and crackers, oats, as opposed to things like cake and cookies and pastries, which we know we all love. Um, in terms of protein, you want to make sure that you have less fatty cuts of meat and then more lean cuts of meat if possible. Things like dry beans and peas, take the skin off of your poultry, etc. For dairy, you want to aim for low fat whenever possible or non-fat if possible. Cheese, milk, yogurt, low-fat ice cream or frozen yogurt, etc. As opposed to your full fat or fried mozzarella sticks or high-fat ice cream. In terms of oils, you want to have more vegetable oils and less butter or animal fats or hydrogenated oils. Each of your food groups should have mixed up with choices. So don't just eat the same fruit and say, oh, I ate fruit, right? Focus on variety of fruits, whether they're fresh, frozen, or canned. You would need approximately 2 cups of fruit each day, and that would equate to approximately 1 small banana, a large orange, and a 1/4 cup of dried fruit, apricots or peaches or something. Your vegetables, again, vary your veggies. Eat more dark green veggies like broccoli, kale, and other leafy greens. Get your calcium-rich foods in there. So when you get your milk, try to have calcium, high amounts of calcium, but low fat. So try to have an equivalent amount of low-fat yogurt or low-fat cheese instead of having high-fat milk. If there are kids who are a little bit younger, age 2 to 8, you should try to get 2 cups of milk into their systems every day. And if they can't consume milk because they have lactose issues, you can choose lactose-free milk products or calcium-fortified foods and beverages. So sometimes your fruit juice can become fortified with calcium, etc. Certain things will have calcium added into it. Make sure that you choose your grains whole grains. At least half of your diet of grains should come from whole grains as opposed to grains that are, for example, white bread, etc. And go lean on your protein. Try to choose meats and poultry that is lean, so less fat, and try to bake it, broil it, or grill it as opposed to frying it, etc. Try to vary your protein choices if possible. Add in beans and fish and peas and seeds and nuts. And also know the limits on these negative foods like fats, salts, and sugars. Yes, you are supposed to consume fats, salts, and sugars, but not in high quantities. So make sure that you know how much you're supposed to consume and try to stay within those levels, right? Stick within those parameters. Try to choose prepared foods that have lower salts and lower added sugars. Additionally, the flip side of the coin is that you're supposed to maintain an active lifestyle. So in order to maintain a moderate or vigorously active lifestyle, you would want to include things like, so moderate activities would be brisk walking or bicycling or playing basketball, free weights, yoga, walking a dog, etc. More vigorous activities, which would expend more than 7 kcal per minute, would include things like jogging or running or bicycling at higher speeds, like 10 miles an hour. Competitive sports, such as basketball, soccer, lacrosse, rowing on a rowing machine, or karate, or jumping rope. But these would be things that would be examples of vigorous activities whereby you would expend more kcal per minute. So back to Choose MyPlate, right, at myplate.gov. You no longer have to put choose in there now. MyPlate.gov will just bring you there, and that'll help you determine the amount of food that you consume from each of the food groups based on an individual's daily kcal needs. Some important points. The calculated values are going to use the leanest food choices with no added sugars. So if you are actually consuming sugars, you're going to want to add some calories into those numbers. You want to vary the food choices in each group to ensure your diet is adequate. And on a day where your intake is inadequate of a particular food group, make sure the following day you consume more foods from that group to help make up for that. So how much should you be eating from each food group? And I'm not going to read this off to you, but basically what you need to do, remember previously we determined our kcal level and I was somewhere around 2,000 calories. So you figure out your kcal level and that tells you the approximate amount of ounces of grains, cups of vegetables, cups of fruit, teaspoons of oil, and dairy that you should, and cups of dairy and ounces of protein you should be eating. So if your daily food plan includes certain things like solid fats and added sugars, you want to make sure that you are knowing that it's going to cost you X amount of calories, right? So if you make the choice for whole milk over fat-free milk, that's a difference of 65 kcal. The difference of a roasted chicken thigh over a roasted chicken breast, both 3 ounces, difference of 70 kcal. A glazed donut versus an English muffin, difference of 165 kcal. French fries versus a baked potato, that's a difference of 299 kcal. Same potato, just prepped differently, right? Regular soda over diet soda, difference of 150 kcal. So you really can make healthy choices, and every single small choice does add up. So make sure that you choose correctly. Now, I previously told you that fats and sugars were negative, right? And I don't mean that they're bad for you. It's just that you have to make sure that you have a lower amount of them, right? And so every day you should have approximately 260 calories out of that 2,000 daily calories, which is right where I fall, of added fats and sugars. And the other 1740 should be lean foods without added sugars. So yes, you can go ahead and have that cookie, but you can't have the cookie in place of the leafy greens and the dairies and the whole grains. So this is an example of a healthy daily food plan, right? So that you try to, over the day, right, breakfast, lunch, dinner, and a snack, wherever that snack may fall, hit all of the food groups in the recommended amounts. And I'm not going to go through each one of these individually, but the point is that maybe you don't have a whole ton of vegetables at your snack, right? But you do have it for your breakfast and your lunch, right? So if you might miss something in one meal, hopefully you'll make up for it in the next meal, right? You'll note that we don't have milk with every single meal, but as long as you have milk and yogurt a couple times a day, then you'll be able to get your dairy needs in. All right, so I want to talk about something called the exchange system. So this is a diet planning tool whereby you can make a meal plan based on the macronutrient content and the total kcals of the food that you're consuming and group them together based on their content of carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. And this allows you to make specific portion sizes so that you know for each of the foods, so that the food in each group provides a similar amount of kcals per exchange. So in this way, if you want to swap something out, you put something else in it for exchange that has the same amount of kcals. And there's 6 foods in that exchange list that you might want to exchange, switch back and forth. Things like starches, fruits, milks, vegetables, meats, and fats. And this is a really helpful tool to help control your intake of kcals, proteins, and fats. Right, and this would just be showing you number of exchanges per food per day based on your own kcal intake. Now let's talk about food labels. Food labels are regulated by the FDA, and every packaged food has to have the label on it, and that label has to contain the name of the food, the weight of the food, excluding the package and packing material, the name and address of the manufacturer or distributor, and the list of ingredients in descending order by weight. So the first 3 or 4 items are basically going to be the main part of the meal. In 1990, something called the Nutrition Labeling and Education Act came forward, and it mandated that they had uniform nutritional information, serving sizes labeled, so you know sometimes you'll see a bag of chips or whatever, and it'll say there's 12 serving sizes in that chip. Or a single-use soda will say 3 serving sizes. And that's one way that they can get it, that it looks like it has a lower fat or a calorie count, but when you multiply it out by the volume of the can, it's actually quite high. It allows us to have specific criteria for nutrient descriptors as well as health claims. And it makes sure that we have nutrient information like the kcals, the amount of kcals from fat, the total amount of fat, saturated fat, trans fats, etc., for each of the foods that we consume. It also allows uniform serving sizes among similar products and an indication of how the food fits into an overall daily diet. It also is going to have definitions for such sometimes deceptive descriptive labels, such as light and fat-free. And it also demonstrates that health claims are demonstrated to be accurate and science-based if they are made about the food or one of the ingredients of its food. So this is going to help prevent deceptive labeling. And last but not least, but very importantly, it also makes manufacturers denote the presence of any allergens that are found in the food. So some things are under a voluntary point of purchase, so some things don't have those labels on them, things like raw fruits and vegetables and fresh fish. But the stores post the nutrition information on the commonly eaten foods nearby where the products are sold. So if you're in the grocery store, no, you can't find the daily information values on that apple. But if you look somewhere as posted information on the average apple. And this is all regulated by the USDA. All meat and all poultry is regulated by the USDA. So food labels in the grocery stores are required to indicate the country the animal was born and raised in and also slaughtered in. So you know whether or not you're getting, for example, fish from Canada or a fish from somewhere in the United States. Additionally, on the food label, there's a specific region that has a list of all of the nutrients that are obtained if you were to eat one serving of the food. All nutrients added to the product must be listed, and any nutrients associated with a health claim must be listed. Serving size also has to be listed both by weight in grams and by your common household measures. So you'll see it depicted in 2 different weights. And then everything else that's on the panel is going to be based on the listed serving size. So even if there's 5 servings per container, everything's going to be based on 1 serving. And that way you're able to go ahead and have some proportionality. On the left there, you're going to see it says it's the current label, but it's currently the old label, if that makes sense. This proposed new label has gone into effect. And one of the things that they added is this thing here, added sugars. So it doesn't just tell you the total amount of sugars now it tells you the amount of added sugars. So a lot of times you'll see the amount of sugars that are added are all of the sugars. Sometimes you'll see sugars 4 grams, added sugars 4 grams. You're like, oh, everything that is in there is an added sugar. But sometimes food will come with its own sugars. Things like fruits and vegetables have their own sugars in there. So if you get dried fruit, it might not have any added sugars at all, but still have sugars present. So it was important that they differentiated between the sugars that were there naturally and the sugars that were added to it. Additionally, what they did was they made the calories much larger, and the fact that there were X amount of servings per container. So instead of it saying about 8, the first thing it's going to say, there are 8 servings in this container, and then this is your serving size, right up front. One of the other things that they did was that they added things like vitamin D and potassium, which weren't previously required. So they added a lot of the micronutrients and minerals as well. So the new label actually gives more information, and it makes certain pieces of information more prominent, like the calories. We're no longer hiding them. Now they are going to be directly in your face. Now certain foods are going to be exempt from having that nutrient fact. Coffee and tea, for example, don't offer much nutrient value or any sugars. Spices, flavorings, etc. If we have negligible amounts of nutrients in there and you're adding it in such small doses to your food, oftentimes it's not going to have a nutrition facts panel. Food that's going to be ready to eat, right, prepared by Safeway or Foodland, and those are probably also not going to have the nutrition panel, or retail establishments and restaurants are not required to provide you with the nutrient facts. However, oftentimes if you ask, the restaurants do have the nutrient facts on all of their meals available to you if you're trying to be diet savvy. So these daily values are very important. They serve to give a general idea of how the nutrients in the food fit into your overall diet. And if you're basing it off of a 2,000 calorie diet, food is considered high in the nutrient if the DV is 20% or more, and a good source of the nutrient if it's between 10 and 20%, and low in that nutrient if it's less than 5%. Please note that there is no daily value currently listed for trans fats, sugars, and protein. Although some nutrition facts panels have a little footnote at the bottom that has a summary of the daily values for both the 2,000 and the 25,000 kcal diets, which is really nice if you're someone who needs the 2,000 and 2,500. If you need the 2,500 kcal diet and everything's listed in 2,000 kcals, it can be kind of confusing. So it's very nice that they have the alternative option for those individuals. Now, there's a lot of claims that are made on labels about potential health benefits. And not super recently, but the FDA started to crack down on all claims. So currently, there are 3 different types of health claims that are allowed. These have to follow strict guidelines. So nutrient content claims can describe the level or amount of nutrient in the food. Free, high, low, reduced, extra lean, or light. These are examples of nutrient content claims, but be very wary of that. Now, sugar-free should mean 0, right? But low in or high in or reduced compared to what? Light, what does that mean? So these are nutrient content claims that might not necessarily be associated with real values. We also have health claims that have 2 different components. the food or dietary compound that they're referring to, and a corresponding disease or health-related condition associated with that compound. And we have three main types of health claims. One, authorized health claims. These are claims that we know to be true, that have been authorized by the FDA. Health claims that are based on authoritative statements. These might not be as strong, but they do have some demonstrated information to back it up. Or qualified health claims. So these are going to be claims that we know have been supported but might not have a lot of evidence underneath them. Some of the claims that we can have are structure and function claims. So claims on the label that describe how the nutrient or compound affects the structure or function of the human body, right? But you cannot state that the nutrient or compound can be used to treat a disease or condition. So for example, if you were to say that XYZ strengthens your skin, you could not say that it was used to treat wrinkles, right? Any of these dietary supplements that use these structure function claims that we talked about have to display a disclaimer on the label stating the FDA did not evaluate the claim and that it's not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. And if you see that, these obviously are going to be the weakest of the claims. All right, so if you're going to go ahead and take a look at these soup cans, here this one is going to have low sodium. This one says less sodium, and this one makes no comments about the sodium. This one is going to have the highest amount of sodium per serving, 890 milligrams. It's almost an entire gram of sodium. This soup has 25% less sodium than the classic version. And if you have 25% or less, then you can call it less on the label. And that gets down to 450. It's actually just over half. This one is down to 120. And it has a low sodium nutrient claim, means that it cannot have more than 140 milligrams of sodium in a serving. So 140 is the cutoff for the low sodium claim. Less sodium just has to have 25% or more lower than the original, in which case it has 50% of the original. And this one, which makes no claims, has 890 milligrams. So paying attention to the sodium content in your food is very important. All right, so again, let's take a look at the labeling. What kind of labels do we have? So the nutrient is going to have the kcals, that should be on there, right? So if you're going to say that it's calorie free, it's going to have less than 5 kcals per serving. If you're going to say it's low in calories, it has to have less than 40 kcals per serving. If you're going to say reduced or less, then it has to have 25% fewer than the original product, which means that you have to have an original product for comparison. And if it has 50% or more of its kcal from fat, then the fat must be reduced, right? So that's going to be if it's considered light. All right, so when you're looking at fat, free is going to be that we are a half gram per serving or less, low 3 grams per serving or less, 25% less fat per serving than the original would be considered reduced or less, and then light would be the same. It has to have 50% of its kcal from fat has to be reduced under that. All right, and so that's for each of one of these. The labeling for free, low, reduced, less, and light are all going to be different. So low sodium is not the same thing as reduced sodium, even though it seems like it. Low sodium is actually better than reduced sodium, and oftentimes light. If you're light in saturated fats, light in cholesterol, light in sugars, that's not actually saying anything in terms of the saturated fat, cholesterol, or sugar content. So it might make you feel good, but it's not actually going to be all that much better for you. So in general, light isn't really a very strong term. Reduced or less means that we're 25% or more lower than the original, which is actually going to be better, I suppose. But better than that would be low, and of course best would be free. Some of the labeling terms that you might see would be high, rich in, or excellent source of. And that means that it has to have 20% or more of the DV of the nutrient. You might see good source of, which would be 10 to 19% of the nutrient. More, added, extra, or plus means that it provides 10% of the daily value. Lean is only used if you are able to show that it has lower fat. And that's going to be used on seafood or meat generally, and it's going to have less than 10 grams of fat, 4.5 grams of saturated fat, and less than 90 milligrams of cholesterol per serving. Even leaner than that would be considered extra lean, and that would be less than 5 grams of fat, less than 2 grams of saturated fat, and less than 95 milligrams of cholesterol. And then healthy just means that it's low in fat and saturated fat, limited in cholesterol, etc. The sodium content can't exceed 360 milligrams or 480 for meal type foods. Again, that if you go back to the soup, that's going to be right here, 450 in one serving of soup. And then also has to contain about 10% of vitamins A and C, iron, calcium, protein, or fiber. So some labeling terms are worth sticking to, and others have much less. Something that's called light, for example, might have much less weight. So how do we sort out the label claims? So we have three major terms: authorized health claims, claims that are well established; authoritative statements, these are well established but not authorized yet; and qualified health claims, which are going to be significantly less well established. So if the claims are based on a very well established relationship that has been authorized by the FDA, it's considered authorized health claims. Example, calcium and osteoporosis. Right? Increase your calcium, reduce your risk of osteoporosis. That's been approved by the FDA. Same thing with reducing your sodium and decreasing your risk of hypertension. Decreasing your dietary fat is going to decrease your risk of cancer, etc. So all 12 of these are authorized health claims that have actually been backed by the FDA. Now, there are some claims that can be made that are made on authoritative statements but are not backed by the FDA. These are well-established claims such as whole grain foods and the link to the risk of heart disease and certain cancers. So if you increase your whole grain foods in your diet, it's been demonstrated by many articles that that's going to reduce your risk of heart disease and certain cancers. Same thing with potassium is correlated with the risk of high blood pressure. Now, these would be examples of less well-established claims based on evidence that are still quote unquote emerging. However, evidence to support the claim isn't any greater than the evidence suggesting the claim isn't valid. So there are currently things that might be advertised, like selenium might help keep cancer, or antioxidant vitamins, and the risk of cancer might be lower, or something that you've heard of, nuts being associated with heart disease, or omega-3 fatty acids and heart disease. All of these are things that might be claims, but they're significantly less established than authoritative or authorized health claims. Here, this would be an example of a structure function label claim. It's basically saying that we have antioxidants A, C, and E, and that A, C, and E are going to help support a healthy immune system, right? So that's a structure function label claim, that we have X, Y, Z in the food, right? A, C, E, and beta carotene, and that will do A, B, C, in this case, support a healthy immune system. That's a very specific structure function label claim. All right, so let's put everything together. We have our DRIs, we have our dietary guidelines for Americans, we have MyPlate, we have the nutrition facts panel, and we also have that exchange list whereby you can exchange certain foods for others to help maintain healthy eating. Right? And we've talked about each of these throughout this lecture, so you should be kind of familiar with what they are. So I'm going to go ahead and skip that. But how do they guide you in healthy eating? So the DRIs we talked about, these provide recommendations to prevent malnourishment and also prevent chronic diseases for each of the nutrients in the category. And we also have an upper limit to help prevent toxicity. The dietary guidelines for Americans is going to help emphasize healthy food choices, give you guidelines for the types of food, the amount of alcohol intake, and food safety, etc. All of this will be for the objective of maintaining a healthy weight and maintaining physical activity. They use something called MyPlate, which we talked about. This is going to be an area that will help you provide healthy information. Information to provide a healthy diet for yourself based on these dietary guidelines for Americans. And then those nutritional facts panel, which is going to allow you to compare the density inside the foods in terms of nutrient content. And what are they all made of? So the DRIs are comprised of all those acronyms we talked about earlier: EARs, RDAs, AI, UL, AMDRs, right? The dietary guidelines are divided into 9 categories: adequate nutrients, weight management, physical activity, food groups, fats, carbohydrates, sodium and potassium, alcoholic beverages, and food safety. And MyPlate will help you make recommendations on the content or the amount of each that you're going to need in terms of vegetables, fruits, grains, proteins, dairy, and oil based on your level of physical activity. The Nutrition Facts panel serves to present you with information on serving size, servings per package, total kcal, and kcals from fat, also macronutrients, vitamins and minerals, and percentage daily values. And this exchange list allows you to exchange these 6 major food groups interchangeably for one another, as long as you know how much of one equals how much of the other. That includes starch, meats, vegetables, fruit, milk, and fat. Okay, so how many servings are you eating of your food? And this is important because when you think that you might just be eating 1 serving, it might turn out that you're eating 2 or 3. So this is an area whereby in class we might have a discussion on certain things, like should the government be responsible for regulating the sale of sugary drinks, right? How large is a large and how large is too large? Maybe discuss creative ways amongst yourself that companies are able to educate consumers regarding serving sizes of their food products. And what should the role of the FDA be in educating consumers about serving size? So, if you have some time at home to think about these things, these would be the kind of things that would be discussion prompts in lecture. All right, here's a couple more of these. I'm going to continue forward. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much for listening to me today. And I will see you very shortly when we come back for Unit 3. Aloha and have a fantastic day.